Qin Mu let out a sigh of relief and smiled at xianxia, saying that in that case, he could finally be at ease. Monk Yun K's face turned ashen, and he stammered, questioning what Qin Mu meant by being at ease, pointing out that they were trapped in the seal and would be the first to die from the tremors. He reminded everyone of the battle in Heaven Wave City, emphasizing that this upcoming fight would be several times more terrifying than that one. Yu Qinghong and the others also paled at the thought. They all recalled that during the Heaven Wave City battle, only a fragment of Dutian Devil King's magic power had descended, yet even then, it had clashed with the Dragon Rider Sect Master and another cult master level powerhouse, unleashing unimaginable destruction. Not even the formidable Dragon Qilin had been able to withstand such blows. If a full-scale battle erupted here, the devastation would be far worse. To make matters worse, the 50-hectare area was completely sealed off, meaning the energy ripples from the powerhouse's clashes would rebound repeatedly, amplifying the chaos. When that happened, even the Dragon Qilin would be reduced to minced meat. Just then, a flurry of enormous flags suddenly unfurled from the city, stretching endlessly into the distance for dozens of miles. The bronze-masked man and the others standing high up watched the scene, their expressions shifting dramatically. The massive, dozens of yards-long flags billowed upward, covering the enemy camp, with cavalry and countless soldiers concealed beneath them. The bronze-masked man was about to shout a warning to his troops, but before he could finish, the huge flag suddenly rolled up, revealing 360 identical banners arrayed across the city. Strangely dressed figures wearing bamboo hats and carrying cloth sacks waved the flags in unison, and in an instant, the tens of thousands strong army of the Eternal Peace Empire materialized within Daxiang City. Only then did the bronze-masked man's voice ring out, ordering his men to stand on guard, but it was already too late. As the 360 mysterious figures rolled up the flags completely, ferocious-looking creatures brandishing weapons emerged, their murderous auras soaring into the sky. Beneath the flags, golden-armored giants marched forth alongside cloud chariots, while bronze beasts mounted on the sterns of massive flying ships began spewing scorching flames. Enormous birds flapped their wings, stirring up violent gales that swept across the battlefield. By the time the huge flags were fully furled into small bundles, the sounds of slaughter had already erupted. Sharp swords were unsheathed, their ringing clangs mingling with earth-shaking roars. Time seemed to slow to a crawl at that moment, allowing every subtle shift in expression to be seen clearly, from ferocity to malice, from blank confusion to abject terror. Flying swords burst forth with blood-red light, slicing through human bodies and painting the air with sprays of blood. Even the moment when a head was severed from its neck carried a grotesque, eerie beauty. A thunderous bellow shattered the frozen moment. An infantry officer shouted the order for elephant transformation, and thousands of foot soldiers roared in response, their bodies twisting and bulging as they transformed into towering elephant-headed giants. The giants charged headlong into the rebel army, shattering their formations in an instant. Meanwhile, the flying cavalry soared into the sky before diving downward in a steep arc, raining countless flying swords upon the enemy like a lethal downpour. On the flying ships, another order rang out. "Fire bottle gourds!" And the soldiers immediately produced red gourds half a man's height. As they pulled out the stoppers, raging true fire erupted from the gourds, cascading down onto the city walls and reducing countless defenders to screaming torches. A troop of golden-armored powerhouses pushed the cloud chariots forward relentlessly, trampling scores of enemy soldiers underfoot as they smashed violently against the city walls, shattering the stone ramparts, and sending burning figures tumbling down to the ground below. Outside the walls, Grand General who crowns the army and Grand General of Cherishing Transformation raised their spear and halberd high, pointing them directly at Daxiang City. Behind them, the endless ranks of the Eternal Peace Army roared in unison, surging forward like a flood both on the ground and in the sky. The scene inside the city was nothing short of horrific. Before the insect army of Three Wonders Castle could even be deployed, they were swallowed up by a sea of fire and swords, reduced to ashes in moments. The insect army was undoubtedly powerful, but caught completely off guard, both the insects and their handlers were incinerated before they could mount a defense. The female army of Passion Parting Palace fared no better, despite their own formidable strength. Countless sharp swords rained down from the sky, piercing through their bodies and leaving them standing dead, riddled with thousands of holes. By the time their bodies finally collapsed, the flying swords had already retracted into the scabbards hanging at the waists of the cavalry. The entire rebel army and the disciples of the various sects were caught completely off guard, scattered by the infantry charge and forced to fight for their lives alone. No matter how high their cultivation level was, anyone surrounded by the Eternal Peace Empire's formation soldiers had their heads severed in the blink of an eye. While the sect disciples far outclassed the ordinary soldiers in individual combat power, their lack of teamwork left them vulnerable, and they were scattered with a single charge. Though some rebel units were trained to fight in unison, the element of surprise had already shattered their cohesion once the army broke ranks. It was too late to rally. This was nothing less than a massacre, made possible by the sneak attack executed using the Heavenly Devil Cult's teleportation flags. For those caught in the crosshairs, there was only one possible end: total annihilation. On the mountaintop, the bronze-masked man trembled uncontrollably, muttering repeatedly about there being two choices. The Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had given them two options: either be crushed by the Eternal Peace Empire's army, driven all the way to the South Sea and exterminated to the last person, in accordance with Imperial law, or abide by the martial world's rules, challenging the Imperial Preceptor to a fight to the death. They had always assumed they would have to choose between these two paths, never imagining they would face both at the same time. The Imperial Preceptor intended to defeat them in personal combat and wipe out the rebel army simultaneously. Passion-parting Palace Master Qiu Die's voice rang out, filled with fury, as she demanded to know when the Heavenly Devil Cult had begun allying with the Imperial Court, and when the supreme sacred ground of the Devil Path had reduced itself to the Imperial Court's lapdogs. The secrets of hatred-parting Heavenly Sword of Passion-parting Palace required its practitioners to purge their hearts of all emotion, to be free of love, hatred, passion, and enmity, in order to attain the sword technique's highest state of mind. Only with an empty, unclouded heart could one reflect others like a clear mirror, flawlessly and without bias. Yet as Qiu Die watched her disciples being slaughtered, her state of mind shattered completely. This lapse did not go unnoticed. The Imperial Preceptor seized the opportunity instantly, channeling his vital energy into a sword light that expanded exponentially, streaking toward her throat in the blink of an eye. It was not only Qiu Die whose heart was thrown into disarray, all the other powerhouses were equally shaken. By the time they realized what was happening, the Imperial Preceptor had already struck, and none of them were able to intervene in time. A sense of despair washed over Chen Wanyan and the others, as the thought that they were going to die took hold of them all. The mountain was sealed within the 50-hectare Heavenly Prison Seal, meaning that any energy ripples from a clash with the Imperial Preceptor would rebound repeatedly, reducing them all to pulp. But just before the Imperial Preceptor's attack could land, a huge flag suddenly appeared in front of Qin Mu and his companions, wrapping around their bodies completely. With a sudden jolt, the flag vanished, taking Qin Mu, the others, and the dragon Qilin along with it. The next moment, they reappeared at the foot of the mountain. Chen Wanyan, Yun Ke, and Yu Qinghong stared in astonishment at the bamboo-hatted figure standing beside them, who was already in the process of unfurling the huge flag once again. Several hundred identical bamboo-hatted figures surrounded the mountain in a tight circle, their flags billowing as they covered the entire peak. An ancient voice rang out, uttering a single command. Go! Whoosh! The hundreds of flags fluttered in unison, and as they swept past, the entire mountain along with the Imperial Preceptor and all the other cult master-level powerhouses atop it vanished without a trace. All that remained was a barren patch of white earth, with the ruins of the City Lord's manor crushed beneath their feet. Chen Wanyan, Yun Ke, and the others stared in bewilderment as the mysterious figures raised their flags once more, this time covering their small group completely. Before they could even begin to process what was happening, another huge flag enveloped them, and they felt the world spin violently around them. When their feet finally touched solid ground again, they found themselves standing atop a nearby mountain peak, far removed from the battle raging in Daxiang City. The mountain peak was extremely high, with fierce gales howling around them, rustling their clothes and hair. Several hundred bamboo-hatted figures stood silently beside them, their identities still shrouded in mystery. Chen Wanyan and the others struggled to suppress the shock coursing through them, exchanging confused glances. They whispered among themselves, realizing that these figures were clearly powerful practitioners of the Heavenly Devil Cult, and wondering aloud what the cult could possibly want with kidnapping them. The Heavenly Devil Cult was an incomparably mysterious organization, renowned as the #1 sacred ground of the Devil Path. They had always operated in the shadows, and despite countless investigations by the Eternal Peace Empire's court, very little useful information about them had ever been uncovered. For the cult to go so far as to assist the imperial preceptor, and then to spirit their small group away from the site of his battle, could only mean that they had some elaborate plan in motion. Suddenly, the mysterious figures removed their bamboo hats in unison, then bowed deeply and performed the disciple-esque greeting, their voices ringing out in perfect harmony as they paid homage. Subordinates pay respects to sacred cult master and saintess. Chen Wanyan and the others froze in stunned silence, their hearts filled with unease as they watched these powerful heavenly devil cult practitioners bowing before them. Monk Yun-Kei immediately slammed his eyes shut, shouting in a panic that he had seen nothing, that he did not recognize any of their faces, and begging them not to silence him. Just then, a familiar voice sounded beside them, bidding the figures to rise and dismissing the need for formalities. "Thank you, sacred cult master," the figures replied in unison, straightening up as they spoke. Chen Wanyun and the others turned to stare at the speaker in utter disbelief. Could it be that Qin Mu, the first abandoned child to enter the Imperial College, and the institution's first Imperial academician, was actually the cult master of the Heavenly Devil cult? Qin Mu looked at them with a gentle smile on his face. "If the academician is the sacred cult master," Yu Qinghong asked, her voice trembling with shock, "then who is the devil saintess?" Xianxia smiled shyly at her in response, and Yu Qinghong felt a chill run down her spine, her hair standing on end. Chen Wanyun's eyes widened further as he recognized two more figures among the crowd, Jian Sanxing, the director of the Imperial College's Hall of Hidden Light, and Qin Yunting, the director of the Hall of Array Element. His heart sank like a stone as he muttered to himself, convinced that they were all going to die. Monk Yun-Kei shouted in outrage, pointing out that they were all doomed now that they had seen the cult members' true faces, and scolding Chen Wanyun for making matters worse by naming Jian Sanxing and Qin Yunting aloud. He lamented that he had closed his eyes to avoid seeing their faces, but now that he had heard their names, he was just as good as dead. Jian Sanxing's sword hall master glanced coldly at the four of them, then turned to Qin Mu and asked, "Sacred cult master, now that they have seen our true faces, should we silence them to ensure our secrets remain safe?" Monk Yun-Kei's eyes flew open instantly, and he turned to Qin Mu with an ingratiating smile, addressing him first as academician, then quickly correcting himself to sacred cult master. He reminded Qin Mu that they were classmates, and that Qin Mu had even beaten him once before, hoping to jog his memory. He then turned to Hu Linger, begging her to intercede on his behalf and reminding her of all the money he had given her in the past. Hu Linger tilted her head to the side and wagged her tail, her expression conveying helplessness. She could do nothing to help him. Qin Mu stepped forward to console them, telling Monk Yun-Kei and the others not to worry, assuring them that he would take care of everything. He then turned to Sword Hall Master and instructed him to ask the four of them if they were willing to join the Heavenly Devil cult. If they refused, he said, Sword Hall Master could bury them in this scenic spot with its green hills and clear waters. Turning back to his friends, Qin Mu continued to reassure them, urging them not to panic and promising that he would settle the matter. He then added as an afterthought, telling Sword Hall Master to carry out the executions away from his sight if it came to that, and to make sure the swords were drawn quickly, to minimize their pain. "I've heard you loud and clear!" Monk Yun-Kei shouted in a panic, yelling at Sword Hall Master not to come any closer and declaring that he was already a member of the sacred cult. Yu Qinghong and Chen Wanyun exchanged a glance, and Yu Qinghong asked Chen Wanyun in a low voice what they should do. Chen Wanyun hesitated for a moment before replying, pointing out that the Heavenly Devil cult's willingness to assist the Imperial Preceptor proved they were aligned with the Imperial Court, and that joining the cult would not be a bad thing. As for refusing, he trailed off, the corners of his eyes twitching nervously, leaving the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Yu Qinghong let out a sigh of relief, agreeing that there was nothing to lose by joining the Heavenly Devil cult and announcing her decision to join. The wolf slave, following her lead, nodded his agreement without hesitation. Yu Qinghong then turned to Xianxia, blinking her eyes innocently as she asked the saintess if the cult would really have spared them even if they had refused to join. Xianxia let out a soft laugh, telling her that the cult master had a kind heart and that his earlier threats had merely been a joke. Monk Yun-Kei let out a huge sigh of relief, muttering to himself that he had known all along it was just a joke, and turning to Qin Mu to confirm that he had been kidding earlier. Qin Mu merely chuckled in response, saying nothing. Monk Yun-Kei's face turned ashen once again. Qin Mu walked over to the cliff edge and gazed toward another mountain peak several miles away, the site where the Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and the dozen cult master-level powerhouses were locked in battle. The heavenly prison seal that the bronze-masked man and the others had set up was already riddled with holes, and terrifying energy storms were surging out from these gaps, unleashing violent gales that tore entire forests from the ground, sweeping countless trees into the sky and shredding them to pieces. The battle raging atop the mountain was beyond terrifying, a life-or-death struggle between the most powerful beings in the world. Even from miles away, with the heavenly prison seal still partially intact, the sheer intensity of the clash was palpable. Whoosh! Another violent gale swept past, and Qin Huanyun and the others finally realized why the wind had been so strong when they first arrived on the peak. The gales were being stirred up by the battle raging miles away. The wind grew stronger with each passing moment, bending the trees on the surrounding mountains to their breaking point. Gust after gust swept in from all directions. No sooner had one gale passed than another arrived, snapping trees back and forth until they split in two. The mountain where the battle was taking place should have been completely shattered by now. Qin Mu watched as the ground where the powerhouses clashed grew lower and lower, gradually flattening into a plain. Even with his green heaven's eyes, Qin Mu could only make out vague details of the battle from such a distance. The combatants were moving far too fast for his eyes to track their movements, let alone their techniques. He could only gauge how many fighters remained by the trails of energy left in their wake. Another cult master-level powerhouse has fallen, Qin Mu thought to himself, his heart trembling slightly. Yu Qinhong looked around at the silent heavenly devil cult practitioners standing beside them, all of whom were watching the distant battle without any intention of intervening. She couldn't help but ask aloud why they weren't going to help the Imperial Preceptor. Qin Mu shook his head and explained that the Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was more than capable of handling the situation alone. He pointed out that the three old monsters of the previous generation had only managed to injure the Imperial Preceptor by launching a sneak attack when he was surrounded by 10,000 troops. If the Imperial Preceptor himself was the one launching a sneak attack, few in the world could stand against him. The heavenly devil cult's role was simply to create the perfect opportunity for him to strike. The moment when the sect master's state of mind was shaken and their guard was down was the ideal time for the Imperial Preceptor to make his move. Whether it was the number one Devil Path cult allying with the Imperial Preceptor, or the Heavenly Devil cult using their teleportation flags to deploy the Eternal Peace Army, the goal was the same: to massacre the sect disciples and shake the resolve of the cult master-level powerhouses, throwing their minds into disarray. Even though their state of mind was only disrupted for a brief moment, that was more than enough time for someone as powerful as the Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor to seal their fate. While all cult master-level powerhouses were experts of the Divine Bridge realm, there was a vast gap between the strong and the weak within that realm. As the Imperial Preceptor himself had once said, he had no weaknesses in any realm, no matter how intricate his opponent's techniques were. His own straightforward, unyielding approach would always prevail. His cultivation base surpassed that of his peers, and his combat skills were equally unmatched. When launching a sneak attack, there was virtually no one who could withstand even a single blow from him. This was precisely what had happened in Heaven Wave City, when Dutian Devil King had been killed by Mute with a single sneak attack. Qin Mu estimated that the Imperial Preceptor would be able to eliminate at least 4 of the powerhouses during their moment of disarray. How many more he could injure would depend on his own strength. No matter how spectacular this battle between the world's strongest powerhouses was, very few people would be able to witness it clearly. Of the several hundred people present on the peak, only the Heavenly Devil cult's left and right guardians would be able to follow every single movement of the combatants on the battlefield. Not even the hall masters of the cult's 360 halls would be able to see the techniques clearly. Qin Mu fixed his gaze on the battlefield once again, still unable to make out the details of the fight. He could only see the afterimages left by the combatants' lightning-fast movements, and the dazzling lights emitted by their divine arts and sword techniques. Every now and then, one of those lights would vanish, signaling the death of another powerhouse. Only 8 figures remain now. Other than the Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, there are still 7 people left, Qin Mu muttered, his eyes flickering with curiosity. Those 7 must be the strongest among the original group, but he had no way of knowing exactly who they were. He could see the godlike auras radiating from the figures, but their identities remained a mystery. If I can't see the battle clearly, I'm missing out on a priceless opportunity, Qin Mu thought to himself. He wondered if he could awaken his Cyan Heaven's eyes to enhance his vision. Qin Mu channeled his vital energy, directing more and more of it into his eyes as he attempted to construct the formation markings required for the Cyan Heaven's eyes. His eyes already had 3 layers of pupils, his own natural pupils, the pupils formed by the basic Heaven's eyes, and the pupils formed by the green Heaven's eyes. If he could successfully awaken the Cyan Heaven's eyes, they would form a 4th layer, allowing him to see things that were otherwise invisible. But as he directed his vital energy into his eyes, he suddenly felt a foreign presence entering his eyes along with the energy. Qin Mu froze in shock, and in that instant, everything on the distant battlefield became crystal clear, far clearer than anything his green Heaven's eyes could have shown him. He shook his head in disbelief and looked again, but the battlefield remained just as clear. And what was even more astonishing was that he had not yet finished constructing the formation markings for the Cyan Heaven's eyes. "There's someone else's eyes inside my eyes," Qin Mu realized with a jolt, a bone-chilling cold spreading through his body. He could now see every single movement and action of the Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, every layer of his divine arts and sword techniques, and even the underlying structure of his cultivation methods. Every twitch of his muscles, every subtle shift in his expression, everything was laid bare before him. This was not what his own eyes were seeing, it was what someone else's eyes were seeing. Or more accurately, someone else was borrowing his eyes to observe the battle. But who could it be? A sudden realization struck him. When he had summoned Dutian Devil King in Heavenwave City, the Devil King's consciousness and magic power had used his body as a medium to enter the Devil God sculpture. At that time, he had been executing the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, and he had felt sparks flowing out from between his brows and surging into the sculpture. As he had circulated the technique, he had sensed something entering his body along with the flow of his vital energy. Later, when the disciples of the Great Mountain Sect had arrived and used the Devil Withdraw command, even though the spell had failed to drive Dutian Devil King's consciousness back, Qin Mu had felt the summoning link being severed. The flow of the Devil King's consciousness and magic power from his body had been cut off, but not completely. This meant that a fragment of Dutian Devil King's consciousness and magic power still remained inside his body. In that case, the one hiding in my body and borrowing my eyes to observe the battle is none other than Dutian Devil King himself, Qin Mu thought, feeling a surge of terror. Where exactly was the Devil King's consciousness hiding within him? Why had he never sensed any abnormalities during his cultivation of the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique all this time? What was Dutian Devil King planning? Granny C had the consciousness of the former heavenly devil cult master Li Tianqing sealed inside her body. If he ended up with Dutian Devil King's consciousness inside him as well, it would be a cruel joke indeed. But after a moment's thought, Qin Mu forced himself to calm down. For now, it was actually beneficial to let Dutian Devil King borrow his eyes to observe the battle. It allowed him to witness the battlefield clearly and study the divine arts unleashed by the world's top powerhouses, which would broaden his horizons exponentially. What's left inside me is just a fragment of Dutian Devil King's consciousness and magic power, Qin Mu told himself firmly. No matter how strong he is, he can't be that powerful in his current state. As long as I can find the fragment's south hiding place, I'll definitely be able to get rid of it. For now, I need to pretend I know nothing and not alert him. Finally, he was able to see the battle clearly. The Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's swords were not physical weapons, but constructs formed from his vital energy, ever-changing, capable of gathering and dispersing at will. Fierce flames raged around his body, making him look like a god descending to earth. Qin Mu suddenly recalled seeing a similar aura radiating from the village chief's body in the past. When the Imperial Preceptor executed his sword techniques, even the most basic sword forms appeared infinitely complex and marvelous. His swordsmanship contained not only the fundamental sword moves, but also intricate calculations and transformations that defied comprehension. Is this the Dao sword of the Dao sect? Qin Mu wondered in astonishment. He could see the unmistakable shadow of the Dao sect's Dao sword in the Imperial Preceptor's techniques, a form of swordsmanship based on incredibly complex calculations. For example, anyone could draw a yin-yang symbol, but very few could calculate the precise proportions of the circle divided by the curved line. This required mastery of the Dao sect's foundational technique. The yin and yang come and go within 2 modes. To fully unleash the power of this technique, one had to be proficient in the canon of supreme mystery, using it to calculate endless numbers. To reach the highest level of mastery, one had to be able to calculate to the Su Kong and Qing Jing decimal places. The Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor has extremely profound attainments in mathematics, Qin Mu thought to himself, feeling a twinge of regret. If he had known this earlier, he would have taken the opportunity to consult the Imperial Preceptor about the canon of supreme mystery when they were traveling south together. The three powerhouses currently clashing with the Imperial Preceptor were the three elders, Teacher Puer, Wanderer Li, and True Lord Tian, all renowned top practitioners of the previous generation. The auras radiating from their bodies made them look like three ancient gods, each wielding unique and formidable techniques. The massive brush in Teacher Puer's hand looked like a horsetail whisk with its long bristles, but it had far fewer transformations than a traditional whisk. Wanderer Li was a sword cultivator, his swordsmanship incredibly intricate but still inferior to the Imperial Preceptor's. His techniques were based on the 14 basic sword forms. While marvelous in their own right, they were ultimately outdated, left behind by the march of time. True Lord Tian specialized in refining venomous insects, transforming them into all kinds of bizarre dragon-like creatures. There was a 300-yard-long heavenly centipede dragon, a heaven silkworm refined into a dragon silkworm, a green snake transformed into a green flood dragon, and countless other insects of strange and terrifying shapes. But despite their power, these venomous creatures fell from the sky one after another under the Imperial Preceptor's sword, slain without mercy. Qin Mu estimated that True Lord Tian would not be able to hold out much longer. Besides these three, 4 other powerhouses still remained in the fight. One of them was Qi Dayo of the Beggar Sect, whose 100 Pur mystery technique was extremely unique. It allowed him to switch between physical and incorporeal forms at will, making him impossible to track, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. The technique was based on the principle of having nothing at all, making it a truly formidable and unconventional power. Another survivor was Spiritual Master Dao Quan, who was the weakest among the remaining combatants. Qin Mu could not tell whether he had managed to survive on his own merits, or if the Imperial Preceptor had spared him, seeing him as too insignificant a threat to waste energy on. The third was Venerable Ji Kong of Great Strength Monastery. His formation, existence, destruction, emptiness for incantations Midra was incredibly powerful, but under the Imperial Preceptor's relentless sword attacks, the revered monk who had attained the Tao after decades of cultivation was covered in wounds, his strength nearly exhausted. The fourth was the bronze-masked man, whose attacks were the most overbearing of all and also the most puzzling to Qin Mu. The bronze-masked man relied primarily on divine arts, and when he unleashed his power, 9 dragon phantoms would appear, looking so lifelike that they seemed almost real, charging forward with earth-shattering force. These 9 dragons contained countless transformations, encompassing every type of offensive and defensive divine art, as well as techniques for controlling fire and water, and manipulating yin and yang. The flames he summoned were both fierce and overbearing, yet infinitely flexible and changeable. He was equally adept at offense, defense, and even refining, switching between these roles at will. Furthermore, he had cultivated the 9 dragons to the point where they were almost physical entities, capable of inflicting real damage. This was none other than the 9 dragons monarch technique, the secret technique of the Imperial Ling family, which could only be cultivated by those with the Emperor's bloodline. Even ordinary princes and princesses were forbidden from touching it. It was clear that the bronze-masked man was a member of the royal family. Judging by his cultivation level, he must be one of the highest-ranking members of the Imperial clan. Yet despite his overbearing attacks, the Imperial Preceptor did not strike him down with the same mercilessness he showed the others. Qin Mu suspected that the Imperial Preceptor had some kind of reservations about killing him. Who exactly is this person? Qin Mu wondered, his heart filled with shock. Just then, he felt a sudden stirring in his heart and turned to look westward only to see a gigantic apparition of a majestic mountain hurtling toward them at incredible speed. Qin Mu froze in astonishment. The mountain was impossibly large, yet it was merely an apparition, not a physical entity. It was formed from the combined auras of countless monks with eccentric appearances. This was Mount Meru, the sacred mountain of Buddhism. The mountain apparition had countless peaks of varying sizes, and atop each peak sat a monk meditating in the lotus position. Some stood holding jade vases, while others sat with their bellies exposed, smiling serenely. At the very top of the highest golden peak, a colossal Buddha statue shone with brilliant light, as if carved from pure gold, with 10,000 rays of light radiating from behind its head, an awe-inspiring and sacred sight. Great Thunderclap Monastery! Old Buddha Rulai! Qin Mu's heart trembled violently. The Great Thunderclap Monastery had arrived, with Rulai himself leading the monastery's guardians, venerables, bodhisattvas, and arhats in a hurried charge toward them. What could they possibly want? At that same moment, the Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor also sensed the approaching aura and suddenly launched a ruthless attack, slaying Venerable Jikong with a single strike. The Heavenly Devil Cult practitioners turned as one, their gazes fixed on the approaching Mount Meru apparition. "Bald donkeys!" the left guardian sneered. "Bald donkeys!" the other cult members shouted in unison, their voices filled with disdain. Monk Yun-Kei heard everyone cursing the newcomers as bald donkeys and quickly joined in, forcing the words out of his mouth. After all, he was now a member of the Heavenly Devil Cult even if he was a monk himself. The Mount Meru apparition floated to the sky above them, and the guardians, venerables, bodhisattvas, and arhats standing atop the peaks looked down at them, their voices cold and unified as they spat out their own insult. "Evil creatures of the devil path!" Qin Mu wore a strange expression on his face as he muttered to himself. "It seems that the relationship between our Heavenly Saint cult and the Great Thunderclap Monastery is a little strained."